So we got the first real move of the day. Chris Paul is going to Phoenix. Granted, we kind of saw this one coming already. For OKC's sake, I think Oubre, Rubio, and the first, that's a pretty good return. I mean, you're talking Oubre, who's 25 years old and just had his best season. Rubio is a nice solid player that they can keep and then maybe trade. The pick is a pick, so that's great. Sam Presti just continues to get more of those. So I think for OKC, it's a pretty nice return for Chris Paul. For the sake of Phoenix, which is of course the real thing of this immediately makes them a playoff contender in the Western Conference. Chris Paul, was he a top 10 player this previous season? I think given that KD and Steph were out, I guess you could say that. Even if you want to say everybody's healthy, Chris Paul is still one of the 13, 14, 17, I don't know, best players in the league. I think Devin Booker has cemented himself into that group as well. So suddenly Phoenix has 2 of the 20 best players in the NBA. And if you want to be cynical, you can say, well, Chris Paul, he is too old and his injury stuff is there. And okay, that's fair. He played 58 games, 2 straight years. The year before that, he played 61 games. He, of course, hurt his hamstring against the Warriors in the playoffs. All valid. But for Phoenix's sake, you look at it and you say, well, Oubre was probably not essential to their future because it seems like Cam Johnson and especially Mikal Bridges could have been more important for them going forward. Then you look at Rubio, who, okay, nice piece, certainly, but Chris Paul's obviously better. And this also drags Phoenix out of a potentially pretty rough situation. I mean, I know they were very successful in the bubble, no doubt about it. But it could have been bad for them to just assume, oh, well, we're going to carry that energy into next season. You always want to try to maximize your chances of winning. And I think for the non-essential stuff they gave up here, this is good. Now, the draft pick is interesting. Top 12 protected in 2022, top 10 in 2023, top 8 in 2024, unprotected in 2025. That is some decent insurance in case Chris Paul ages badly, he gets hurt, he straight up leaves at some point. It does help Phoenix out a bit. I think they're hoping that they will be sending that pick to OKC in 2022. Which means they still have 2 straight seasons of draft picks, and if they end up nailing one of the picks, this year being the 10th pick, then I think that'll look a little better when they eventually end up losing out on some pick. Now, I guess the other doomsday scenario would be if Chris Paul declined his player option in 2022. But if Phoenix has a sense that he's going to do that, then maybe they would trade him by the deadline of this upcoming regular season. If they just think he's probably not going to come back, they could still get something for him, trade him to a contender, that sort of thing. Granted, he'd be very expensive, so we'd have to see if teams could match the money. But I think that's kind of the insurance plan if for whatever reason this doesn't go well. I guess the other potential thing is if Chris Paul plays out the last 2 years of his contract for Phoenix and then leaves in free agency in the 2022 offseason. But even then, it's like you might be able to arrange a sign and trade. Granted, he's going to be like 37 at that point. But assuming he'll still be good, I figure you could still get assets for him. So I do think there's emergency backups for OKC if this doesn't go well for whatever reason. But still, for a team that was clearly desperate as hell to raise their stakes in the league and make themselves more respectable and all that, Phoenix definitely did that. If we want to get a little wild in terms of projecting the future, I mean, if Chris Paul can continue to age well, then we assume Phoenix would extend him on his next contract. And do I think Chris Paul can still be good at 37, 38, 39? Honestly, yes. I mean, it's him, it's Kyle Lowry. LeBron's the biggest example of aging well, obviously. But, I mean, we've seen enough guys do it or currently do it at this point to where I'm just like, yeah, why not with where we are with modern sports science and all that stuff. And as we look to the future, you could say that this type of move could elevate Devin Booker's game. I mean, we imagine it would. We saw what Rubio did. Imagine what Chris Paul can do for Devin Booker, and we'll talk about the X's and O's in a moment here. But it's also like maybe Chris Paul declines to being the 30th or 40th best player in the league, But then Devin Booker and we can say DeAndre Ayton and potentially any other moves the Suns could make over the next couple of years to get some other really good players. You could have Chris Paul as like the super version of New York Knicks Jason Kidd on a very good team. So I think that's what Phoenix is hoping for with this move. Now, if we think about the basketball stuff, obviously there's just general Chris Paul things. There's Chris Paul, DeAndre Ayton pick and rolls. There's Chris Paul pull-up mid-rangers, with which he is the best mid-range shooter in the NBA. He proved against the Rockets that he can still beat guys in isolations, even if it's not the thing that he wants to do the most. This should give Devin Booker even more ability moving off the ball. I mean, I don't think it would be maximizing Booker to have him moving off the ball all the time, but there will be shots actually created for him now. I mean, Rubio was a good playmaker, but he wasn't forcing defenders to collapse on him that much. Chris Paul can do that. So if Devin Booker goes from maybe 1 to 2 or 3 shots created for him a game to, with Chris Paul, maybe it goes to like 4 or 5, then Booker's efficiency could get even better, and his efficiency was already pretty damn great this previous season. This will, of course, also help out Mikal Bridges and Cameron Johnson, and I mean, we're going to have to see what the Suns do with the rest of the roster. They did match most of Chris Paul's money with this move, not all of it. They didn't have to because they're under the cap, but this at least gives them some more leeway in free agency. And I just think about the Chris Paul and DeAndre Ayton pick and roll a little bit. And it's like, well, if you trap Chris Paul, he's always going to make the right play, and Ayton's skilled enough to make something happen off of that. If you want to switch on that, then CP can probably beat the big guy. Ayton can post up on who's ever switched on to him. It's never this easy, especially in the NBA, because there's random 6'7" dudes who are really tough to post up on, but it should be tough to defend that. I think the Booker-Ayton pick and roll can be a real thing as well. Can we see some sort of CP Booker two-man game? I mean, I don't know. I don't know if Booker's going to set screens for Chris Paul like that, but the overall level of play is just going to be so elevated under Chris Paul. And I mean, we're still going to see times when Booker is running his isolations or whatever, and CP is spotting up. Of course, teams are not going to leave him open. That's another thing too. Just going from Rubio's threat as a shooter to Chris Paul is pretty massive. And suddenly it's CP, it's Booker. Bridges has been good from outside so far. Cameron Johnson is maybe already one of the best shooters in the league. I should say Mikal Bridges is shooting. It might be still a little bit of wait and see. His percentages have not been awful, but he hasn't attempted a super lot. But the point is that Phoenix can put a lot of shooting out there, and so I think it's fair to think that they can be one of the best offenses in the league now. Defensively, we hope that Chris Paul is still very good. He's, of course, going to demand a lot from this team on that side of the floor. I think looking at the roster now, you got Chris Paul, you got Mikal Bridges, you hope that DeAndre Ayton can continue improving as a defensive player. He has definitely gotten better since he was drafted. Devin Booker defensively, I think he can get to solid. I mean, Booker is big enough to where I think he can defend. I mean, he's 6'5", probably about 210. He's listed at 206 on Basketball Reference, but he also has a 6'8" wingspan. So I feel like he can get to good enough. And if you're going to have Mikal Bridges be very good defensively, Chris Paul be very good, Booker be good enough, then you hope that the rest of the roster can be there. And yeah, I think, again, because I just feel like Oubre and Rubio were non-essential for Phoenix, it's a good move for them. And for the sake of OKC, they got a 25-year-old in Oubre who can be good. So yeah, the fear is that this goes really south over the next couple of years and suddenly Phoenix's pick looks really bad for them. And I think the way that happens is if Chris Paul ages very quickly, which it does not seem like he's doing, or if he gets hurt, which freaks me out a little bit more. But again, the protections on the pick soften the blow a little bit. I mean, maybe the Suns end up missing out on the 13th or 14th pick in 2022, whatever it may be. There's ways in which it wouldn't be ideal, but it wouldn't be a disaster. But of course, he was so good this previous season that this is the type of thing you do. So, yeah, man, this is Phoenix going for it. And even this version of going for it, they didn't really have to put all the chips on the table. So yeah, this immediately makes the Western Conference more interesting. And the Western Conference was already loaded. I mean, you could look at the West and you could say, all right, take the 8 teams who made the playoffs last year, obviously take out the Thunder, put the Warriors back in, and then the only other team who seems wishy-washy right now is Houston, because we're going to have to see if Westbrook and Harden are even on the team in 2 weeks. So we'll see what happens with them. But even if Houston trades themselves out of the playoffs for this upcoming season, it's still going to be really tough. But that's life in the West. So, yeah, Chris Paul in Phoenix.